Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Harry Lauseneziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. I just came back from Albany, where I participated in the New York State Chess Championship. But what happened there, I'm going to show you in some of my next videos in a few days. For now, we are going to continue with the series of presenting games played and recommended by my YouTube chess friends. We already finished the first 5 videos, and there are 2 more videos from suggestions from my Facebook friends. And in fact, these 2, I'm going to present one of them now and the other in another video. These 2 are from my compatriots, from my fellow Greek chess players. And today we're going to have a game where my Facebook friend Ioannis Pαπαιωάννου faced, who is a grandmaster, faced another grandmaster, the Russian Alexander Morozevich. Alexander Morozevich is a very famous name, or at least was a few years ago, one of the top players in the world. When they played, their ratings were 27-32 for Morozevich, who had the white pieces, versus 26-25 for Pαπαιωάννου, who had the black. And clearly Morozevich was the favorite. This happened, by the way, in the year 2010, and the game took place in Bursa, Turkey. It was part of the 7th World Team Championship. This means that the players were presenting their countries. Morozevich was playing for Russia, and Pαπαιωάννου was playing for Greece. Currently, just to tell you, 15 years later, Morozevich's rating has fallen a little bit to 2650. Papayuano is almost the same, from 2650. 25 is just 2 points lower, 2623. We're going now to the chessport of chess.com and their computer and see what happened. Here we are, and once again, on the left, of course, you're going to see the chessboard, and Morozevich had the white pieces, Papayuano had the black. On the right part of the board, you're going to see the computer valuation. Plus means white is better, minus means that black is better. If that was the best move, and if not, which should have been the best move, and what are the best 3 options for the next player. And we're going to start now. Morozevich starts with a move that is a little unusual. Usually you start with a pawn, especially central pawn, but Morozevich took his knight from g1 to f3. This happens occasionally. It's not a bad move. In fact, it's a book move. And Papayuano replied the same way, the same knight, symmetrical. Copycat, as they call it. Morozevich sends his pawn from c2 to c4, which basically is the English opening with interpolation, meaning the first and second moves have been played the other way around. And Papayuano moved his pawn to e6. Knight goes to c3 for Morozevich, and bishop to b4 for Papayuano, which means that if Morozevich moves his d pawn, then the knight is pinned. But Morozevich decides to do something different. He wants to start an attack on the king side. It's still in the book, pawn goes to g4, although it has a little bit of surprise value, at least at the lowest level. I don't think at the levels of these 2 players that will surprise. It's a book move, meaning it has been discussed and analyzed in theory. And now Papayuano is going to leave theory. He's going to do what is called a sort of kingside castling. Good, but not the best move. Computer would prefer the pawn to go to h6 to stop the g pawn from going to g5. Morozevich starts having a small advantage. You see 0.44. Now the pawn goes to g5, and the knight has to move. Where would Papayuano put his knight? Not too many squares to go. h5 and e8 are the only squares. And Papayuano sends his knight to e8. Morozevich now sends his rook to g1. The reason being is to support the pawn g5, especially if it was to advance. And Papa decides to counteract this game by playing in the center. Pawn goes to d5. Queen goes to b3 for Morozevich, who is threatening Papayan's knight at b4. And Papa defends it by pushing the pawn to c5. Pawn of c takes at d5. Knight goes to d6 for Papa, developing the pieces. Bishop goes to h3 for Morozevich. Players are little by little developing their pieces. Knight to a6 for Papa, of course, cannot go to c6. It will be taken by the pawn. And now Morozevich will continue his game with the g pawn. Need goes to g6. Mistake, says the computer, because it can be taken. And a computer says what would happen according to these exchanges. The best choice of piano is to take it to the f pawn, and then we exchange the bishops, and white has a pawn on e6 that is protected by the queen, but it is not that safe, because if the queen is attacked, the queen would rather save herself than continue supporting the pawn at e6. But Papa decides, instead of taking the pawn, to threaten the queen at b3 by pushing his pawn to c4. Yes, the computer says it's a blunder. Why it's a blunder? Yes, the queen is attacked, but Morozevich does not need now to move his queen, because he can check. And when he checks, then black needs to reply to the check and forget about taking the white queen. That's what Morozevich is going to do. Pawn goes to h7, check. And now Papa is going to reply in a way that I'd like to ask the viewers to take care of, to really learn it, keep in mind, because it's very tempting, if one is materialist, to just take a pawn. But Papa is going to cover the king behind the pawn. Great move is a computer. Why? It's a great in the sense, yes, it is the best. Yes, you avoid the temptation of taking a pawn, but good players know it, because if you take the pawn on h7, your king is not that safe, can easily be attacked. But now, if you put any queen or rook on the h file, the pawn, believe it or not, the white pawn protects the black king. The queen, of course, will save herself, goes to c2, but white has already gotten the pawn. The e pawn takes a d5 for Papa, and now that this happened, is the white bishop is in danger. And where can it go? Back to f1? Not that good, undeveloped. To g2, blocks the rook. So Morozevich does the best possible choice, exchange it. Computer says it's great, but in my personal opinion, great move is not only if it is good for you, but if it is a little bit unexpected, surprising. For me, that was no surprise. Well, this is the easiest of the options. You get rid of the worry of having to protect your bishop. Knight goes to d5 for Morozevich. Rook goes to e8. And other than this blunder, or that the computer said, this unusual blunder the players had in the 10th move, pawn going to g6 and then pawn to c4, the players are more or less even until now. King to f1 for Morozevich. Why? To unpin the pawn at d2 before the pawn could not move. Computer says a mistake, not huge difference, but not the best. Let's see. But I'm explaining the logic behind that. It's not that blindly Morozevich played a bad move. He has a reason. He wanted to unpin the d pawn so he can later push it, and after he pushes it, the bishop at c1 is free to go to many other squares. Papa will send his knight on e4. And now, of course, knight at d5 is attacked for Morozevich. He'll send it to e3. Queen goes to d7. Good move. Knight goes to g5 for Morozevich. And Papa mistakes his computer, and now Papa starts being ahead by 1.26. It's not that obvious because it protects the pawn on h7. It forces the queen to stay at the 7th rank to protect the pawn at f7. The worst comes to worst, if it's taken by the knight, it can be taken by the rook. Papa instead of taking the knight, will send his own knight to c5, trying little by little to start placing his pieces near the white king. Morozevich takes a nice pawn and has an advantage of +3 material. Let's count. Yes, 7 versus 4 pawns. Pieces are the same. And although Morozevich has a material advantage of +3, the computer thinks that Papa is much better by 1.61. Let's see what's going to happen. Now it's time to exchange the knights. The white rook is near the black king. Papa will send his knight at e4, threatening the white rook. And Morozevich will save his rook by placing his queen on b5. You see what's going to happen. If Papa take the rook, then Morozevich wins the queen. But Papa stops his threat by placing his rook on c6. So now, if Papa can freely take the rook because he doesn't have to worry about losing his queen. That's why Morozevich will save his knight, sending it to f5. But you see what's happening? The computer shows one mistake after another for Morozevich. They're not obvious, meaning I would not have seen it myself. Which is the best move? Send the rook to h5. And you see that the advantage now for Papa becomes quite significant, 3.38. Knight to d6 for Papa that is threatening simultaneously queen and rook. We have what's called a fork or double attack. Great moves as a computer. Once again, a very good move, but not that difficult to see. A move that is difficult to see is if temporarily you lose material, but on the long term you gain, that really. But some moves are a little bit obvious, so even though it's very helpful for the player and strengthen the position, I wouldn't necessarily call them great or brilliant or anything like that. Queen goes to d3 for Morozevich, save his queen and the rook. Why? Because if the black knight takes the white rook, then queen takes queen. Second time that Morozevich uses this idea to save his pieces, especially his rook. But Papa decides I'm down 3 pawns. Why not also lose an exchange? Rook goes to e3. Takes the knight. And of course, Morozevich must take back the rook one way or the other. The best way is the pawn. Why? Because if he takes the queen, the rook is lost. Now, the rook is saved by the same trick. If knight takes rook, queen takes queen. The queen is going to take the rook, the 5, which is a great move. Why? What is going to happen if white queen takes a black queen? Now, what's going to happen is the knight will take back the queen. At this point, Papa equalized material. And let's see why. Queen versus queen. Rook versus rook. And white has one light piece, the bishop on c1. Black has two of them, bishop b4 and d6, but white has 7 pawns, black has 4. Material is the same if you count it with the 1-3-5-9 method, meaning pawn 1, knight, bishop 3, rook 5, and queen 9. But let's look at the positional advantages of black. First of all, you have these two pieces of white, rook and bishop, that have not moved at all and can barely move. They can only move by one square. Bishop goes to d2 where it's going to be lost. Rook can go to b1. The pawns, white has 3. The h7 can be taken at any moment, and black does not take it only to keep his king safe. The other 6 pawns, 3 islands with double pawns, the e3 blocking the e2, so positionally clearly black is much, much better. What will white try to do in desperation? You see the computer shows 3.54 advantage for black. Even though the players had no access to computers, and even back in 2010 the computers were not so accurate as now, it was obvious that black was better. So white will send his pawn to a3. Mistakes in the computer, and now the advantage becomes 9.35, more than a queen advantage for black. Queen goes to h3 check. And now you see the M, meaning under best play, black can make in 10 moves. White replies by sending his king to g1. Forced, yes, because the e1 square is attacked by the bishop. And knight goes to 5. White to liberate the rook. Brilliant moves as a computer. Check in 8 moves. Why is it brilliant? Well, yes, black is sacrificing the bishop, but rook is ready to go to g6. If it goes to g6, it's mate. White can still defend. You see here there are some defensive moves. The best or least bad is put the pawn at e4. So if the rook goes to g6, the queen can stop the check at g3. But at this point, Morozevich resigned. Great win for Pαπαιωάννου, and also great win for my own country, Greece. Greece, representative of Greece, beating the representative from Russia, Russia being one of the strongest countries in the world, and it was wonderful that my home country, Greece, was able to have this success. But let's see now, before we continue, the review. What does the computer think about the overall game? 91.6 was the accuracy for Pαπαιωάννου, quite a great one, versus 78.2 for Morozevich. Clearly not his best game. Let's see the ratings. Papαιωάννου rating was 2450, less than his actual rating. But Morozevich was even lower, to 1950. Many times they claim that the computer flatters and gives very high ratings. Now it did the opposite. And let's go to the categories. 2 brilliant moves for Papαιωάννου. Even having one brilliant move is very rare, let alone 2 brilliant moves in the same game. Great moves, 6 versus 1 for Papαιωάννου. Best 9 versus 5 of Morozevich. 2 excellent moves, each of them. Good 4 for Papαιωάννου. Book moves 4 for Morozevich versus 3 for Papαιωάννου. And the negative category, 4 versus 2 inaccuracies for Morozevich, 3 mistakes for Morozevich, no misses for either player, and 1 blunder from each of them. This concludes my presentation of a game chosen by Ioannis Papαιωάννου, my Greek Facebook friend. And Ioannis, thank you very much for your suggestion. It was a great game. And also thank you very much for bringing success to our country, Greece. We have one more Facebook friend game to show at the next video. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching these videos. Thanks to the ones that subscribed. If you have not subscribed, all you need to do is click the button that says subscribe. Thanks for the ones that have liked some of our videos and do some nice comments we have received from time to time. I am Harilaos Aniziris. This is my grecochess YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, see you next time. Goodbye.